Hi everyone, I'm Tirsa Macy Blanco, your presenter of Chapter 18, which is Reading. My reference is the Practice of English Language Teaching, 5th edition by Jeremy Harmer. As you will go along this reading chapter, you will be going to learn the intensive reading, which categorizes into two, the vocabulary question and analytical reading. Next, reading aloud, extensive reading, and reading sequences. Reading is one of the most important language skills that should be developed inside and outside the classroom. It is also one of the most common ways to get information. According to Harmer, the reader employs a number of specific skills when reading, and their success in understanding the content of what they see depends on a large extent on these specific skills. To get the maximum benefit from their reading, students need to involve in both intensive and extensive reading. When we say intensive reading, it is often teacher-chosen and directed. It is designed to enable the students to develop their ability to read for a number of different purposes, such as getting the general meaning of a text, or sometimes called skimming, finding specific details that the reader is looking for, or sometimes called scanning, or understanding what is behind the words, or shall we say inference. Intensive reading material will be the basis for classroom activity. The goal of this reading is to read shorted text. So this reading is done to carry out to get specific information. If you look at reading material in many course books, you will find that it is usually accompanied by exercise types such as true or false questions, multiple choice questions, and questions which ask what, how often, when, and etc. Faced with this, students may well feel as if the object of the exercise is to test their ability to read rather than helping them to understand better. However, comprehension questions like this can be used so that the emphasis is on teaching reading rather than testing it. The first way of doing this is to get the students to read the questions before they read the text and speculate on what the correct answers might be. This will help activate their schema and get them in the right frame of mind to read. It will also give them an idea of how to read and what to look for. When the students have read the text, it is a good idea to have them go through the answers to the questions in pairs or groups. When we get the students to say what they think the answers are, we can ask them to refer to the part of the text, such as sentence, phrase, or paragraph, which help them to decide in what way we ensure their engagement with the text. There are, however, various other ways that we can ask our students to interact with reading text, and this may be just as effective as the comprehension question as we have discussed so far. These are the ways to interact with reading text. First, encouraging student responses. Second, transferring information. Third, interrogating the text. Fourth, using reading as a springboard. Let's talk about encouraging student responses, which pertains that the more that the students bring of themselves to the task of reading a text, the better. One of the most important ways of encouraging student engagement with a text is to ask them whether they like it and why, or why not. Not only will this make the students read the text with their hearts as well as their minds, but it also be a clear indication about how well they have understood what they have read. We can also ask them which characters in a story or in a text they most like or dislike and why. Peter Watkin of year 2011 suggests that students can mark tasks with symbols such as check, which means I agree, X, which means I don't agree, question mark, which means I don't understand this, exclamation point, which means this is surprising, shocking, or lol, which means this is funny. Once again, these responses indicate how well the students have understood the text, but more importantly, they encourage them to express a personal response to what they are reading. We can also have our students look at the title of a text and then individually or in pairs or groups complete a chart before they read the text to guide their meaning. So here is an example of reading knowledge chart which categorizes in 3. So the first column, they will write things I or we know. The second column, things we are not sure of. The third column, things I or we would like to know. So that way, they are reading the text for their own purposes rather than to answer questions that someone else is asking. Another ways to interact with reading text is transferring information. So one way of having the students demonstrate their understanding of text is by asking them to transfer the information they see to the other media. For example, with the kind of factual texts that are a main feature of CLIL, which means Content and Language Integrated Learning, so we can ask the students to complete graphs, pie charts, and quadrants or draw pictures to show their understanding of the information they have read. So we can also ask them to turn the information in the text into a dialogue. So for example, one student pretends to be a reporter who asks questions and the other has to answer with information from the text. So the students can be asked to tell a story or describe information from a text as a different character or from an opposing point of view. So all of these techniques require the students to pay close attention to the text so that they can transfer the information appropriately. Another way to interact with reading text is interrogating the text. The text which express opinions or which contain continuous information and many types of fiction can be used to promote critical thinking. So, do we believe the truth of what is written? How is evidence used to back up the writer's opinions? How much does what is being described depend on culture? And how would it be changed in different cultural settings? How well written is the piece? So such critical interpretation forces students to develop a clear understanding of what they have read. So they need to show not only that they have understood the facts, but also the inferences of the text. But of course, it is much easier for higher level students to integrate text in this way. Another way to interact with reading text is using reading as a springboard. When our students have read a text, we can use it as a springboard for any number of follow-up activities and text-related tasks. Perhaps they can conduct a debate about the issues raised. They might want to role-play the characters mentioned in the text or write a letter in response to it. As we saw, they can transfer the information into other media. We can also ask the students to follow up topics which they have read about in class, on the internet, or in other places. By doing this, they continue working with the same kind of topic vocabulary and have a motive to read more. Now, let's discuss the vocabulary question, which is under the intensive reading. It has often been said that students need to know about 95% of the words in a text in order to be able to understand it easily, according to Hirsch and Nation of year 1992. Even if this figure is somewhat exaggerated, the fact that the students need to know a majority of words if they are to read successfully has implications for extensive reading. So it suggests that we might want to recommend graded readers, for example, at a lower rather than a higher level for many of our students. One way of helping students to deal with challenging texts is to pre-teach some of the vocabulary they need, especially where this is specialist topic vocabulary that is crucial to understanding the text. Such pre-teaching can have enormous effect on their capacity to comprehend the text as a whole, according to Henschoglu and Eldridge of year 2007. However, there are potential problems with this. If we want our students to acquire strategies for dealing with authentic text where there may be unknown words, then pre-teaching will not help. Furthermore, as we shall see when we discuss listening, over-concentration on pre-thought words may take the focus away from the rest of the text. If we ask our students to read a text without any lexical pre-teaching, however, it makes sense to give them an opportunity to discover the meaning of a vocabulary they have found difficult. Thus, for example, we will allow and encourage them to ask about words they found in the text which they did not understand, or they can consult dictionaries. But of course, this process could take up a considerable amount of time, so we need to reach some kind of bargain with our students so that meaning explanation and searches do not become completely unmanageable. So there are three ways of doing this. So first, time limit, which we can give a time limit of say 5 minutes for post-reading vocabulary inquiry, whether this involves dictionary use, language corpus, searches, or questions to the teachers. Another is word phrase limit. We can say that we will only answer questions about 5 or 8 words or phrases. Next, meaning consensus. So we can get the students to work together to search for and find word meanings. To start the procedure, individual students write down 5 words from the text they most want to know the meaning of. When they have each done this, they share their list with another student and come up with a new joint list of only 5 words. This means they will probably have to discuss which words to leave out. 2 pairs join to make new groups of 4, and once again, they have to pull their list and end up with only 5 words. Finally, perhaps after new groups of 8 have been formed, it depends on time and the atmosphere in the class. So finally, the students can look for the meanings of their words in dictionaries and/or we can answer questions about the words which the groups have decided on. This process works for 2 reasons. In the first place, the students may well be able to tell each other about some of the words which individual students did not know. More importantly is the fact that by the time we are asked for meanings, the students really do want to know them because the intervening process has encouraged them to invest some time in the meaning of search. Understanding every word has been changed into a cooperative learning task in its own right. Now let's proceed to analytical reading or text mining, which is also under in the intensive reading. So one of the main reasons that language learners read is to improve their lexical and grammatical knowledge. So this may be achieved through repeated extensive reading, but it can also happen when we mine text for new language or language use which we think our students should pay attention to. So we can ask the students to read any text they encounter analytically. We can, for example, ask them to find any past tense verbs in the text and tell us how they are used and formed. We can direct them towards any lexical cohesion in the text and ask them to explain how it works, or we can get them to find particular words and phrases. We can also, of course, analyze how paragraphs are constructed or discuss issues of punctuation. When we ask our students to write within a distinct genre, we often ask them to analyze text in order to help them to write appropriately within that genre. So they can look at the layout of the text, the particular words and phrases that they use, and the cohesive devices which are typically used to hold such text together. Text mining usually takes place after the students have read for comprehension or have given some other kind of response to a text. Any kind of text can be analyzed in this way, even if it's only a paragraph long, or as in the case of English announcement in a Mexican street. So just a sentence or a phrase. So with short text, the students can discuss why the words are put in the order they are. So examine the agreement of subject and verb, or think about whether the text gets its message across even though it is short. Now let's learn the reading aloud. According to Elizabeth of year 2004, reading aloud means reading a book by producing sounds audible to others. In classrooms all over the world, students read aloud from their textbooks. It is one of the oldest and most common procedures that teachers use. Many students enjoy the activity, and for the teacher, it is a way of making the class quiet. The students, at least those who are reading, are generally highly focused on the task. But there can be problems when reading aloud is organized so that the students in sequence read sentences from a text that they have not seen before. The results are usually highly unsatisfactory. The students often stumble over unfamiliar words and read with a lack of confidence and enthusiasm. It can be extremely boring, and worst of all, they usually know they are doing it badly, so do their colleagues. This is a pity because reading aloud can actually be incredibly useful and can help with the links between sounds and written forms that are the basis for successful comprehension. Furthermore, it can be a way of increasing the confidence of weaker students by giving them a chance to get their mouths around a continuous flow of correctly formed, meaningful English, which they are not yet so good at doing in spontaneous speaking, according to Porcaro of year 2012. If they manage to do this well, they will see that they can speak English better, perhaps, than they had thought. For it to be really successful, the students need to see what they are going to read aloud before they ask to those who. They should read a sentence or paragraph to themselves and think about how they would say it. We should give them a chance to mumble, vocalize it so that they can feel how it sounds. Perhaps, then they can rehearse what they are going to read in pairs or small groups, and only when they think they know where to place the stress, how to pronounce the words, and what intonation to use, will use ask them to read individually in front of the whole class. We can make reading aloud even more involving by letting the students first hear the passage being read by the teacher. They can follow in their books, marking stressed syllables, putting in pauses for breath, or etc. And then, they can read along with the teacher or the audio in a technique sometimes called parallel speaking. So gradually, the audio is faded out so that by the time they are reading on their own, they can do so with confidence and ability. When we read aloud to our students, we need to do it with passion and commitment. If the students see us doing it with enthusiasm, they are far more likely to make an effort to do the same themselves than if we read in a lackluster way. Now, let's proceed to extensive reading. When we say extensive reading, it is used to obtain a general understanding of a subject and includes reading longer texts for pleasure. The reader doesn't care about specific or important information after reading. Extensive reading often takes place outside the class and has traditionally been encouraged not for language study, so much as for practicing reading, having a pleasurable experience, and gradually acquiring language. According to Catherine Walter of year 2008, she points out that the more students read, it is believed, the better they get, not only at reading, but also at vocabulary recognition, spelling, writing, and even pronunciation. Even experienced readers sub-vocalize what they read. That is, say the words in their heads. When we say extensive reading materials, students can read whatever they want to read for extensive reading. Of course, just like anyone else. At higher levels, they will probably want to read books written for a competent English language speaking audience. But at lower levels, this would clearly not be appropriate. Instead, we can offer them graded readers. So when we say graded readers, those are the books written especially for language students at different levels. So at their best, they tell powerful stories even in the simplest language. So here is an example. So, why are you here? My mother asked. I tell her about the soldiers. They're going to come to the school again and look for you, she says. You must leave this country. And go where? I asked. Go to my Uncle Jacob in England, my mother answers. But I don't want to leave, I say. Go in the morning or be a soldier, like your father and he's dead, my mother shouts. So this is from Armand's Journey by Philip Ross, Cambridge University Press, starter level. So the fact that they themselves make the choice will greatly enhance their motivation to read. So extensive reading in this view is the reading of lots of easy, enjoyable books. And we know that the more the students do this, the better their reading and their English in general will become. Another is extensive reading tasks. So despite our wish that our students should enjoy reading and be motivated to do a lot of it on their own, not all of them get the reading habit. Some do, indeed, read more and more, but others do not. One way of encouraging our students to read is to ask them to keep a record of what they read and when. We might ask them, for example, to fill in a simple form for every book they read. We might have a comment sheet on the inside cover of every book where the students record a satisfaction grade and leave their name and a brief comment. So I have here an example of a reading report form. So they can write the student's name, the date, the name of book and author, the type of book, whether it is thriller, romance, then satisfaction grade, they can rate it to 0 to 5, then brief summary of the plot, favorite character, favorite episode, favorite sentence or phrase? Then, would you recommend this book to your classmates? Why or why not? So through this reading report form, we can also ask our students to keep a reading diary where they write about books they have read and what they felt about them. They can also include notes about words and phrases that cause them difficulty. Let's proceed talking about books. So many teachers boost their students' motivation to read by organizing book clubs or literature circles. So according to Andrzej Seruki of year 2012, put his students in a literature circle, a group that has all read the same book and gives them different rules such as discussion director, character collector, scene sketcher, or etc. This is to motivate them to take responsibility for interpreting the text they have read. So discussing books after they have been read does not just help to motivate the students. However, it is also a way of helping them to remember what they have experienced and encouraging them to use words and phrases from the text as they discuss its content. So this will prompt natural repetition of that language. Now let's discuss extensive and intensive. So at the University of Swansea in Wales, Neil Evans and his colleagues have moved away from the idea that student choice is necessary for extensive reading to be effective, according to Evans of year 2013. He and his colleagues assigned a book to the class and worked with that. Jess Eden tells the story of two young male students who were forced under protest to read romantic fiction in a reading group because that was the genre of the only available books. To their surprise, they enjoyed the books immensely and asked for more in the same vein. Neil Evans and his colleagues blend out of class reading for pleasure with more intensive like in-class reading. They certainly hope that the students will read their assigned graded reader with enjoyment, but they also ask them to discuss the contents, talk about the plots, and analyze the grammar and vocabulary. So extensive reading is important because we want our students to read as much as they can. After all, it can be fun and it's good for language learning. However, if encouraging them to read for pleasure is not enough to motivate them, we will use reports and discussion groups to keep them on track. And we may decide at the same time that getting the students to analyze books that they have recently enjoyed will provide a wonderful resource for analytical reading. Now let's proceed to reading sequences. So reading sequences involve a range of activities. So the students engage with full text in order to understand their overall meaning. They use prediction to activate their schemata. They use what they have read to create their own writing, and they take part in puzzle-like activities to reassemble text. So there are 7 example activities represent reading sequences. So of course, only a fraction of the many ways in which reading can be approached with classes of students. So actually, I will only present example 1 so to know the reading sequences, but if you are willing to know about example 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of reading sequences, you can use the reference of my report. You can read more about it. So, The Practice of English Language Teaching, 5th edition by Jeremy Harmer. So, you can discover another example of teaching reading sequences. So, I have here example 1. So, aka Diaz. So, aim, the students will be able to use their powers of prediction and their schemata to help them understand a text. Activity, reading to confirm expectations. Skills, predicting, reading for gist to reading for detailed comprehension. Age, adult. Level, upper intermediate. CEFR B2. So when we say CEFR, it is a common European framework of reference. So it is a guideline used to describe achievements of learners of foreign language across Europe and increasingly in other countries. So in this example, the students predict the content of a text not from a picture but from a few tantalizing clues they are given in the form of phrases from the passage they will read. So first, give each student in the class a letter A from A to E and tell them all to close their eyes. Ask all the students with the letter A to open their eyes and show them the word lion, written large so that they can see it. Then ask them to close their eyes again, and this time, show the B students the phrase racial groups. Show the C students the phrase paper aeroplanes. The D students the word tattoos, and the E students the word guard. Then put the students in groups of 5, each composed of students A to E. By discussing their words and phrases, each group has to try to predict what the text is about. Go around the groups, encouraging them and perhaps feeding them in new words and phrases like cage, the tenses man or moral authority or etc. Then finally, when the groups have made some prediction, ask them whether they would like to hear the text that all the words came from as a prelude to reading the following text aloud, investing it with humor and drama and making the reading dramatic and enjoyable. So this is the passage. So this is from Maximum Security by R. O'Connor in the literary magazine Granta of number 54 of 1996. So this is the passage. Then after reading the passage, get the students to read the text for themselves and to answer the following detailed comprehension questions. So there are questions after reading the text. So this is a true, false, or probably not. So they will answer if this is true or false or probably. Then before moving on to work with the content of the text, so it is a good idea to take advantage of the language in it to study some aspects that are of interest. For example, how is the meaning of would different in the sentences? I wondered what Y would do if he refused, and a teacher who would turn towards the board. So the discussion possibilities for this text are endless. So how many differences are there between Robert Connor's class and the student's own class? How many similarities are there? How would they or the students handle working in a prison? Should prisoners be given classes anyway? And if so, what kind? What would the students themselves do if they were given their first English class in a prison or in a more ordinary school class or school environment? So part of this sequence has involved the teaching reading aloud. So this can be very powerful. It is not overdone. So by mixing the skills of speaking, listening, and reading, the students have had a rich language experience, and because they have had a chance to predict content, listen, read, and then discuss the text. So they are likely to be very involved with the procedure. In teaching reading, the teacher's responsibilities in helping learners achieve this goal is to motivate reading by selecting or creating appropriate tasks, to set up effective classroom procedure, or to encourage critical reading, and to create supportive environment for practicing reading in the classroom. The teacher has to decide what the purpose in reading will be done. So this is the end of my report. Thank you for watching.